The slap echoed through Nora's diner like a gunshot. Marcus Holloway's face snapped sideways, his cheeks slamming against the cold window glass. For a moment, everything froze, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of conversation, even the hum of the old jukebox in the corner. 17 years old, honor student, varsity basketball captain. None of it mattered now. Officer Dale Riker's badge caught the afternoon light as he grabbed Marcus by the collar, yanking him upright. "Look at me when I'm addressing you, boy." His breath reeked of coffee and contempt. "Kids like you need to learn respect." Marcus's friends Jamal and Trevor sat paralyzed in the booth, their eyes wide with terror. Trevor's hand hovered over his phone, trembling. Should he record this? Should he call someone? But who do you call when the person hurting you is the police? Behind the counter, Nora Jensen's face had gone pale. She'd owned this diner for 23 years, served thousands of customers, but she'd never seen Riker this angry. His face was flushed crimson, veins bulging at his temples. Whatever had happened before he walked through that door, someone was about to pay for it. And he'd chosen Marcus. "You think it's funny?" Riker hissed, tightening his grip. "You and your little friends laughing when I walked in? You think I'm some kind of joke?" But Marcus hadn't been laughing at him. They'd been celebrating Trevor's game-winning shot, lost in the innocent joy of teenage friendship. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong color skin in Officer Dale Riker's world. Marcus forced himself to meet Riker's eyes, fighting every instinct to look away. His father had taught him that. "Stand tall, son. Never let them see you break." His father's voice echoed in his mind, steady and strong. If only his father knew what was happening right now. If only Riker knew who Marcus's father was. The diner had 23 people inside. 23 witnesses watching a uniformed officer assault a child in broad daylight. But not one of them moved. Not one of them spoke. Because they all knew the same terrible truth. Dale Riker was untouchable in this town. Or so they thought. Marcus tasted copper on his lip where Riker's backhand had split the skin. The pain radiated across his jaw, sharp and bright. But worse than the physical pain was the humiliation burning through his chest. Every eye in the diner was on him, watching him be degraded, watching him be made small. Riker leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper only Marcus could hear. "Your kind needs to remember your place. This is MY Town. These are MY streets. And little punks like you." He shoved Marcus back against the window. "You're nothing." What would you do in Marcus's position? When the person sworn to protect you becomes your abuser. When speaking up could mean worse violence. Drop your answer in the comments below. Trevor's phone was definitely out now, recording from under the table. His hands shook so badly the video would be almost unwatchable, but he kept filming. Because someone needed to see this. Someone needed to know. But none of them, not Marcus, not his friends, not Nora, not the 20 other customers frozen in horror, none of them realized that in exactly 4 minutes, everything would change. Because in 4 minutes, a black sedan with tinted windows would pull into the parking lot. And the man who stepped out would make Officer Dale Riker wish he'd never put on that badge. Would Marcus stay silent and let Riker's rage burn itself out? Or would he say the words that could either save him or destroy him completely? Marcus's silence was a choice. Not weakness, not submission, but calculation. Because his father had taught him another lesson too. "Son, there's a time to speak and a time to watch. Learn to know the difference." So Marcus watched. Watched the way Riker's pupils were dilated despite the bright afternoon sun. Watched how his right hand kept clenching and unclenching by his holster. Watched the slight tremor in his jaw that spoke of barely contained fury looking for any excuse to explode. This man was a lit fuse. "Answer me." Riker's spit flecked Marcus's face. "Were you laughing at me or not?" "No, sir." Marcus's voice came out steady, controlled. "We were talking about basketball." Wrong answer. Riker's hand shot out, gripping Marcus's throat. Not enough to choke, but enough to threaten. Enough to remind everyone in the diner exactly who held the power here. "You calling me a liar now? I heard you punks laughing the second I walked in." Jamal found his voice, small and terrified. "Officer, please, we didn't." "Did I ask you to speak?" Riker's head snapped toward Jamal, his grip still on Marcus's throat. "You want to be next?" Jamal's mouth clamped shut. If this kind of injustice makes your blood boil, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next will restore your faith that sometimes, just sometimes, karma comes in a three-piece suit. The vintage clock on the wall read 3:47 p.m. Marcus had been in Riker's grip for less than 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every second stretched into eternity, every breath a negotiation with the hand at his throat. Nora finally moved, taking a small step forward from behind the counter. "Dale, maybe you should." "Stay out of this, Nora." Riker didn't even look at her. "Unless you want me to find violations in this health code nightmare you call a restaurant." Nora stopped. 23 years of building her business, and one corrupt cop could destroy it with a phone call. They both knew it. Everyone knew it. This was Dale Riker's kingdom. These were his subjects. And he was reminding them all of that fact with Marcus's body as the lesson plan. But kingdoms fall. Tyrants fall. And Officer Dale Riker was about to learn that lesson in the most spectacular way possible. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then a third time in rapid succession. Riker felt it too, the vibration against his arm where he pressed Marcus to the window. Expecting a call. Riker's smile was cruel. "Let me guess, your mama? Coming to save her baby boy." He reached into Marcus's pocket and pulled out the phone. 3 missed calls. All from Dad. Riker laughed, holding the phone up to Marcus's face. "Daddy's calling. Should we answer? Should we tell him his son's been disrespecting law enforcement?" His finger hovered over the answer button. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. If his father answered, if Riker said the wrong thing, if his father heard the fear in his voice. "No, not yet. Not like this. Please," Marcus said quietly. "Just let me go. I didn't do anything wrong. That's for me to decide." Riker pocketed the phone. "Maybe I'll keep this as evidence. Or maybe," he patted his chest where his body camera should have been. "Oh, would you look at that? Battery must have died. No one's going to see what happens next except these good folks here. And they know better than to talk." He was right. Eyes dropped to tables, to coffee cups, to trembling hands. The code of silence in small-town America when a cop goes rogue. See nothing. Say nothing. Survive. Outside, gravel crunched in the parking lot. A car door slammed. Footsteps approached the diner's entrance, measured and purposeful. But no one was paying attention to that. All eyes were still on Marcus and Riker. No one saw the shadow that fell across the entrance. No one noticed when the door swung open with the weight of authority behind it. Not until a voice, calm, deep, and cold as winter steel, cut through the diner like a blade. "Take your hands off my son." Would those 5 words be enough to save Marcus? Or would they make everything so much worse? Time didn't just stop. It shattered. Every head in Nora's diner turned toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the autumn sun, was a man who radiated power like heat from a furnace. 6'3", broad shoulders, filling out a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His tie was knotted with military precision. But it was his eyes that commanded the room. Dark, intense, and locked onto Officer Dale Riker with the focus of a predator who just found his prey. Special Agent Marcus Holloway, Senior, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Riker's hand loosened on Marcus's collar, confusion flickering across his face. "Excuse me," I said. The man took 3 steps into the diner, each footfall deliberate. "Take your hands off my son." The words hit like physical blows. Marcus felt Riker's grip slacken completely, felt himself slide down slightly against the window. Relief and terror warred in his chest. His father was here. His father had seen everything. But what would happen now? Riker released Marcus entirely, taking a half step back. But his cop instincts kicked in immediately. Never show weakness, never back down, especially in front of witnesses. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down. This is official police business." Official police business. Agent Holloway's voice could have frozen lava. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, giving Riker no excuse to reach for his weapon, and withdrew a leather wallet. He flipped it open, and the gold FBI badge caught the light like a small sun. Special Agent Marcus Holloway, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division. You let that sink in for a beat. And you just assaulted my 17-year-old son in a room full of witnesses. So let's talk about official business, officer. His eyes dropped to Riker's nameplate. Riker. The color drained from Dale Riker's face like water from a broken dam. Put yourself in that moment. Your abuser just found out your father is the one person who can destroy his entire career. Would you feel vindicated? Terrified of retaliation? Both? Tell me in the comments what's going through your head. Jamal and Trevor sat frozen, mouths literally hanging open. They'd known Marcus's dad was something in law enforcement, but FBI? Civil Rights Division? The same people who investigated dirty cops? Nora's hand went to her mouth. Suddenly, the last 5 minutes made terrible, perfect sense. She'd been serving Marcus and his friends after school for 2 years, always wondered why such a polite, well-spoken kid never talked much about his father. Now she knew. Witness protection? Undercover work? Or simply a father trying to let his son have a normal teenage life? Riker's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. His mind was racing, visible behind his eyes, calculating, spinning, searching for the exit ramp on this highway to disaster. Agent Holloway, there's been a misunderstanding. I was responding to a disturbance call. A disturbance call. Agent Holloway took another step closer. He was now less than 6 feet from Riker, close enough to see the sweat beginning to bead on the officer's forehead. Dispatch will have a record of that call, won't they? Time stamp, caller information, exact nature of the complaint. Silence. No call. Agent Holloway's eyebrow raised a fraction of an inch. So you assaulted my minor, without cause, without provocation, and without your body camera recording. Am I summarizing this correctly? Marcus pushed himself fully upright, his father's presence giving him strength. His cheek throbbed where it had hit the window. His throat ached from Riker's grip. But for the first time in 5 minutes, he could breathe. Riker's hand twitched toward his radio. I should call this in. Get my supervisor. Oh, we'll definitely be calling someone. Agent Holloway's smile held no warmth whatsoever. In fact, I already did. You see, my son has a smartwatch. Biometric alerts. When his heart rate spiked above 140 and his GPS location stopped moving for more than 60 seconds, I got an automatic notification. Same technology we use to monitor agents in the field. He held up his own phone, showing a screen filled with data, heart rate graphs, GPS coordinates, even audio levels. I have the last 7 minutes recorded. Every word, every threat, every hand you laid on him. The smartwatch on Marcus's wrist. He'd forgotten he was even wearing it. His father had given it to him 6 months ago, said it was just to stay connected. But it was so much more than that. It was insurance. It was evidence. It was a lifeline. Riker looked like he might vomit. Now, Agent Holloway's voice dropped even lower, intimate and deadly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to apologize to my son. Then you're going to give me your badge number, supervisor's name, and direct line to your chief. After that, you're going to stand very still while I decide whether to arrest you right now for assault on a minor and civil rights violations, or whether to let the Bureau's investigation process play out over the next several months while your entire career gets examined under a microscope. The diner was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in people's forgotten drinks. Riker's face cycled through emotions: rage, fear, calculation, desperation. His career was exploding in real time, and he knew it. But men like Dale Riker don't go down without swinging. You're making a mistake, Riker said, his voice tight. I've been with this department for 12 years. I have commendations. I have connections. You think one incident with your... Say it. Agent Holloway's words cut like razors. Finish that sentence. Please. Would Riker be stupid enough to make it even worse? Or had he finally realized the hole he was standing in was already too deep to climb out of? Riker's mouth snapped shut, but the hatred in his eyes spoke volumes. This wasn't over. Not for him. Men like Dale Riker didn't just accept defeat, they marinated in it, let it ferment into something toxic and dangerous. Agent Holloway saw it too, recognized it. He'd seen that look 100 times before in 100 different cities. The look of a man who'd just been publicly humiliated and was already plotting his revenge. Good. Let him plot. The Bureau had files on men like him specifically for moments like this. Marcus. Agent Holloway never took his eyes off Riker. Come here, son. Marcus moved on shaky legs, circling around Riker like he was radioactive. The distance between the booth and his father was maybe 10 feet, but felt like crossing a continent. When he reached his father's side, Agent Holloway's hand, warm and solid, rested briefly on his shoulder. A father's touch. Protection. You're safe now. Marcus hadn't realized how badly he needed that touch until he felt it. Agent Holloway's other hand stayed visible, relaxed but ready. FBI agents trained for high-stress confrontations learned to read micro-expressions and body language. Right now, Riker's weight was shifted forward on his toes. His right hand hovered an inch closer to his service weapon than regulation stance. His breathing was shallow and rapid. This could still go very, very wrong. If you're wondering what happens when corrupt power meets federal authority, subscribe now. Because the next few minutes will show you exactly why the FBI's Civil Rights Division exists. Badge number, Agent Holloway repeated. Now, 3-7-4-2. The words came out like Riker was spitting broken glass. Supervisor's name. Sergeant Ron Mercer. Chief of Police. Thomas Aldridge. Riker's jaw clenched so hard Marcus could hear his teeth grinding. But none of them are going to... Going to what? Protect you. Agent Holloway's laugh was bitter. Officer Riker, do you know what my team does? We investigate patterns. Not just individual incidents, but systematic abuse. We look at entire departments, years of complaints, suspicious use of force reports, settlements paid out with taxpayer money, and gag orders attached. He took his phone out again, thumbing through something. And would you believe it? Your name has appeared in 6 separate complaints over the last 4 years. 6. All young black males, ages 15 to 22. All incidents where your body camera mysteriously malfunctioned. All cases where the department investigated itself and found no wrongdoing. Riker's face went from pale to gray. But here's the thing about federal investigators. We don't investigate ourselves. We come in from outside. We dig deep. And we don't stop until we find everything. Agent Holloway's eyes were surgical in their precision. So when I said your entire career is about to be examined, I wasn't speaking hypothetically. The examination started 7 months ago. 7 months. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Riker actually stumbled backward half a step, reaching for the counter to steady himself. You've been investigating me? Not you specifically. Your department. Agent Holloway slipped his phone back into his pocket. But you've certainly made yourself a priority subject as of about. He checked his watch. 8 minutes ago, when you decided to assault a federal agent's son, while said son's biometric monitoring system recorded everything. Nora made a small sound, halfway between a gasp and a laugh. She'd wanted someone to stand up to Riker for years, had watched him abuse his authority, bully customers, make threats. But she'd been too afraid. Her business, her livelihood, her safety. All of it could disappear with one vengeful phone call from a cop with connections. But this was bigger than Riker. This was justice with a capital J and federal resources behind it. Around the diner, phones were emerging from pockets. The spell of fear had broken. Trevor's under-the-table video was now joined by 4 more recording openly. Someone was already typing furiously, probably posting to social media. The code of silence was crumbling in real time. You can't, Riker started. I can. I am. And I will. Agent Holloway's voice remained perfectly level. Now, apologize to my son. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the diner held their breath. This was the moment. The fulcrum. Would a man who'd spent 12 years drunk on unchecked authority actually humble himself in front of the people he'd terrorized? Riker's face twisted through a dozen emotions. Pride, rage, fear, calculation. His eyes darted to the phones recording him, to the witnesses watching, to the FBI agent who held his future in an evidence file. I'm sorry, he finally choked out. The words sounded like they were being dragged from his throat with fishhooks. Look at him when you say it. Agent Holloway's command was absolute. Riker's eyes, still burning with barely suppressed hatred, locked onto Marcus. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. Not good enough. Agent Holloway didn't move an inch. Apologize for putting your hands on him. Apologize for the threats. Apologize for abusing your authority. All of it. Marcus felt his father's hand tighten slightly on his shoulder. Steady. Strong. This is what accountability looks like, son. This is what it means when power answers to the law instead of hiding behind it. Riker's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed his pride, his dignity, everything he'd built his identity on. I'm sorry for putting my hands on you. For threatening you. For abusing my position. Each word looked like it caused him physical pain. Better. Agent Holloway nodded once. Now step away from my son and wait outside for your supervisor. I've already called him. He'll be here he checked his watch again, about 3 minutes. But would Riker actually wait? Or would the walk to his patrol car become a run to the county line? Would a cornered, desperate man with a gun and nothing left to lose make one final fatal choice? Riker backed toward the door like a wounded animal, never taking his eyes off Agent Holloway. His hand brushed his radio, his gun, his pepper spray, every tool of force he'd relied on for 12 years. But for the first time, those tools meant nothing. Worse than nothing. They were evidence. Weapons he could no longer afford to reach for because everyone was watching, recording, bearing witness to every micro-movement. The door chimed as he pushed through it, and the autumn air rushed in behind him. Through the window, they watched him stumble to his patrol car, lean against it, press his palms against the hood like he might collapse without its support. Inside the diner, the entire room exhaled at once. Holy, Jamal whispered. Marcus, your dad is... FBI, Trevor finished, still recording. Your dad is the actual FBI. Marcus couldn't find words. His throat was tight with a dozen different emotions, relief, gratitude, residual fear, and something else. Pride. His father had taught him to stay strong, stay silent, wait for the right moment. And then his father had arrived and shown him what strength really looked like when backed by authority used correctly. Agent Holloway turned to address the diner, his voice carrying easily to every corner. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. I'm going to need statements from everyone who witnessed what happened here today. My colleagues from the Bureau's field office will be arriving shortly. In the meantime, please don't delete any photos or videos you've taken. They're evidence, and they're protected by federal law. He pulled out business cards, started distributing them to the closest tables. If Officer Riker or anyone from the local police department contacts you and suggests you stay quiet, change your story, or delete your recordings, that's witness intimidation, and it's a federal crime. You call me immediately at this number. Now, here's the real question. If you witnessed something like this, would you actually give a statement? Risk getting involved? Or would you delete the video and pretend you saw nothing? I want your honest answer in the comments. Nora approached, her hand still shaking. Agent Holloway, I thank you. Dale's been harassing customers for years. Small things at first, implied threats, comments about health inspections if we didn't comp his meals. But lately it's gotten worse. More aggressive. I've wanted to report him, but you were afraid. Agent Holloway's expression softened slightly. Ma'am, that's exactly why we investigate systemically. One complaint is easy to dismiss, but a pattern? Dozens of people with similar stories. He handed her 2 business cards. That's a federal case. And Nora, may I call you Nora? She nodded. When officers create an environment where citizens are too afraid to report abuse, that's not law enforcement. That's tyranny with a badge. And ending it is exactly why I do this job. Through the window, 2 more vehicles pulled into the parking lot. One was a sheriff's department sedan, dark blue, with gold trim. The other was an unmarked black SUV with government plates. Sergeant Ron Mercer emerged from the first, his weathered face already set in an expression of deep concern. From the SUV came 2 agents in similar suits to Holloway's, a woman with steel gray hair and a younger man with the athletic build of someone who started every morning with a 5-mile run. Agent Holloway watched them approach, then turned back to Marcus. Son, Agent Chun and Agent Rodriguez are going to take your statement. I need you to tell them everything. Every word Riker said, every action he took. Don't minimize it. Don't exaggerate it. Just the truth. Dad, Marcus's voice cracked. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the reality of what had happened was crashing over him in waves. I didn't do anything wrong. We were just laughing about basketball. And he... I know. Agent Holloway pulled Marcus into a brief, tight hug. Marcus felt his father's heart beating steady and strong against his ear. I know you didn't. And now everyone else will know it too. Outside, Sergeant Mercer was already talking to Riker, and even through the glass you could see the conversation was not going well for the officer. Mercer's face was red, his gestures sharp and frustrated. Whatever Riker was saying in his defense wasn't landing. Good. Agent Chun and Agent Rodriguez entered the diner, their credentials already out. Rodriguez had a tablet tucked under one arm, ready to document everything. Chen's eyes swept the room with the practiced assessment of someone who'd walked into 100 crime scenes and knew exactly what to look for. Mr. Holloway. Chun approached Marcus with a gentle smile. I'm Special Agent Diana Chun. I know today has been traumatic, but you did everything right. You stayed calm, didn't escalate, and now you're going to help us make sure this never happens to anyone else. Okay. Marcus nodded. His voice felt small. Okay. The next hour was a blur of statements, photographs, witness interviews. Agent Rodriguez documented the red mark on Marcus's cheek, the slight swelling on his lip. Multiple angles, different lighting, everything by the book. Chin interviewed Jamal and Trevor separately, their stories corroborating Marcus's down to the smallest detail. Nora provided her account, then opened her filing cabinet to reveal something that made even Agent Holloway's eyebrows rise, a folder labeled Riker Incidents. Inside were photocopies of complaint forms she'd filled out but never filed, notes about aggressive behavior, dates and times of threatened health inspections that coincided with her refusing to comp his meals. I was keeping records, Nora said quietly. Just in case someone like you ever showed up. Ma'am, Agent Chen said with genuine respect, this is evidence of a protection racket. You might have just expanded this investigation into racketeering territory. Outside, Riker was being placed in the back of Sergeant Mercer's vehicle. Not handcuffed, not yet, but clearly being removed from duty. His service weapon had already been taken, his badge surrendered. The walk of shame for a cop who'd walked too long in the armor of assumed immunity. But as Mercer's car pulled away, Riker's eyes locked onto Marcus through the window one last time. And the message in that stare was crystal clear. This isn't over. Would that look be enough to make the federal charges stick? Or was it just the opening move in a much longer, more dangerous game? 20 minutes after Riker's patrol car disappeared down Main Street, the diner had transformed into a federal investigation hub. Agent Rodriguez had set up a laptop on the counter, uploading witness statements in real time to the Bureau's secure database. Agent Chun was on her phone with the Civil Rights Division director, her voice low and urgent. And Agent Holloway stood by the window, watching the street with the vigilance of someone who knew that corrupt cops rarely went quietly into the night. Marcus sat in the booth with his friends, an untouched cup of hot chocolate growing cold in front of him. Jamal and Trevor hadn't left his side, their earlier fear replaced with a strange mixture of awe and concern. Dude, Jamal whispered, your dad is like a superhero. He's just doing his job, Marcus replied, but even he could hear the pride in his voice. Nah, man. Trevor shook his head. My uncle got roughed up by a cop 3 years ago. Filed a complaint. Nothing happened. The system protected their own. He glanced at Agent Holloway. Your dad? He's what's supposed to happen. He's what it looks like when the system actually works. But did it really work? Or was this just one case, one moment, one FBI agent who happened to be in the right place at the right time because his son was the victim? If every cop who abused their power faced real consequences like this, would you finally believe the system works? Or is it only justice when someone powerful is personally affected? Hit subscribe if you think this conversation matters, because we're just getting started. Agent Holloway returned to the booth, sliding in across from Marcus. Up close, Marcus could see the tension in his father's jaw, the way his eyes remained slightly unfocused, not looking at them but processing, calculating, planning the next 10 moves in a chess game where people's lives were the pieces. How are you holding up? His father asked. I'm okay. Marcus touched his cheek gingerly. The swelling had gone down slightly, but it would definitely bruise. Dad, were you really investigating the department before this? Agent Holloway nodded slowly. We were. A pattern of complaints, like I said, but patterns don't give you a prosecution, they give you suspicion. What we needed was an incident clear enough, documented enough, that it couldn't be dismissed or buried. His expression darkened. I never wanted it to be you who provided that incident. But now you have what you need. Now we have what we need. Agent Chun interjected, joining them at the booth. Between your smartwatch data, the video recordings from multiple witnesses, Nora's documented pattern of harassment, and Riker's own statements, she smiled grimly. We have enough to bury him and potentially open investigations into every case he's touched for the last 5 years. 5 years of potential victims. 5 years of abuse hidden behind a badge. Trevor raised his hand tentatively, like they were still in school. Agent Chun, can I ask something? Of course. What happens to people Riker arrested? I mean, if he's crooked, if he abused his power, does that mean those arrests were wrong? Agent Chen's expression turned serious. That's exactly the kind of review we conduct. Every arrest, every traffic stop, every use of force report. If we find evidence of civil rights violations, those cases can be challenged. Convictions can be overturned. It's a long process, but it's necessary. Marcus thought about that. How many lives had Riker damaged? How many young men like him had been stopped, threatened, assaulted, arrested on false charges? How many families had been broken by a system that protected Riker instead of protecting them? And how many were still out there, believing that justice wasn't for people who looked like them? Agent Rodriguez approached, his tablet in hand. Agent Holloway, we've got a problem. Everyone at the booth tensed. Chief Aldridge just issued a statement to the local press. He's calling this an unfortunate misunderstanding and saying Riker was responding to a credible threat in the diner. Rodriguez turned the tablet around, showing a news site already running the story. The headline read, Local officer involved in altercation with FBI agent's son. Chief says situation mischaracterized. Agent Holloway's jaw tightened. So they're going to spin this. Make Riker the victim. It gets worse. Rodriguez swiped to another article. Riker's union rep has already released a statement saying you, quote, used your federal position to intimidate a local officer performing his duties, and that they're considering filing a formal complaint against you for abuse of authority. The audacity was breathtaking. Riker assaults a child, and within an hour, his department and union are coordinating a counter-narrative to paint him as the victim and Agent Holloway as the aggressor. This was the system protecting its own. This was how corruption survived, not through violence alone, but through institutional machinery that activated the moment one of their own was threatened. Jamal's voice was small. Can they do that? Can they just lie? They can try, Agent Chin said firmly. But we have evidence. Video, biometric data, witness statements from 23 people. The truth doesn't change just because they tell a different story. But people believe the first story they hear, Nora said from behind the counter. Especially when it comes from the police chief. By the time the truth comes out, half the town will have already decided your father was in the wrong. She wasn't wrong. Marcus had seen it before, the way narrative solidified, how official statements carried weight that individual testimony couldn't match. By tomorrow, there would be people in this town convinced that Marcus had somehow provoked Riker, that his father had overreacted, that the FBI was overreaching. Agent Holloway stood, his phone already in his hand. Then we get ahead of it. Rodriguez, contact our media liaison. Chun, I want a press conference scheduled within 2 hours. And someone get me the U.S. attorney for this district on the phone. He looked at Marcus. Son, this is about to get very public. The news will run your name, your face. They'll dig into your life, your school records, looking for anything they can use to justify what Riker did. Are you ready for that? Was he? Was anyone ever ready to have their life turned into a public battlefield? But then Marcus thought about what Trevor had said about the system actually working, about being what was supposed to happen. If his story, his pain, his father's intervention could be the catalyst for change, wasn't that worth the scrutiny? I'm ready, Marcus said, and he meant it. Would the truth be enough to overcome institutional corruption? Or would this become another case where cameras and evidence somehow weren't enough to deliver justice? By 6 p.m., the parking lot of the Bureau's field office looked like a media circus. 7 news vans, their satellite antennas extended toward the sky. Reporters checking their makeup in car mirrors, camera operators testing light levels, producers barking into headsets. The local story of a diner altercation had exploded into regional news the moment someone recognized Agent Holloway's name and connected it to 3 previous high-profile civil rights cases he'd worked. This wasn't just about Marcus anymore. This was about a pattern, a system, a reckoning. Inside the building's conference room, Marcus sat between his parents. His mother had arrived an hour ago, her eyes red from crying, but her spine steel straight. She'd hugged Marcus so hard he thought his ribs might crack, then immediately transformed into what his father called her lawyer mode. His mother wasn't an attorney, but she'd worked in legal advocacy for 15 years, and she knew exactly how these situations could go sideways. "They're going to ask you questions designed to make you look aggressive," she told Marcus, her voice calm but urgent. "They'll ask if you talk back, if you made any sudden movements, if you have any prior incidents at school. You answer truthfully, but you don't volunteer anything. Clear?" "Clear," Marcus confirmed. Agent Holloway adjusted his tie in the reflection of the window. "The U.S. Attorney is sending an observer. They're considering federal charges against Riker, civil rights violations, assault under color of authority, possibly even conspiracy if we can prove the department knew about his pattern and covered it up." "How long does something like that take?" Trevor asked. He and Jamal had been invited to attend as witnesses and as Marcus's support system. "Months usually, sometimes years." Agent Holloway's reflection met Marcus's eyes. "But the investigation starts today. And that starts with making sure the true story gets out before the lies can take root. Here's what the media won't tell you about these cases. The victim has to be perfect for people to care. Perfect grades, perfect record, perfect behavior. The second they find a flaw, the whole narrative shifts. What does that say about justice? Drop your thoughts below." The door opened, and a woman in a sharp navy suit entered, Melissa Reeves, the Bureau's media liaison. She had the exhausted competence of someone who'd spent the day managing a crisis that kept escalating. "All right, here's the situation," Reeves said, pulling up a chair. "Chief Aldridge is scheduled to give a statement at 6:30, which means he'll be finishing right as we start. His strategy is obvious. Paint Riker as a decorated officer responding to a tense situation. Paint Agent Holloway as an overprotective father who pulled rank. And paint Marcus as," she hesitated. "As what?" Marcus's mother's voice was dangerously quiet. "As a teenager who may have misinterpreted standard police procedure due to, and I quote from the talking points we intercepted, cultural sensitivity issues and heightened awareness due to national rhetoric." The room went silent. "They're saying he imagined it," Jamal said, his voice hollow. "They're saying he only thought it was racist because of what? Because of everything he's seen on the news? Because he's been taught to see racism everywhere." "That's exactly what they're saying," Reeves confirmed. "It's a common tactic. Discredit the victim's perception of events. Make it about misunderstanding rather than misconduct." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. They weren't just calling him a liar. They were calling him brainwashed, paranoid, someone who saw prejudice where there was only procedure. Never mind the red mark on his face. Never mind the 23 witnesses. Never mind the video evidence. Agent Chun entered with a laptop, setting it on the conference table. "You need to see this before we go out there." She pressed play on a video, but it wasn't the one Trevor had filmed. This was from outside the diner, from a security camera Marcus hadn't even noticed. It showed Riker entering the building, his face already red, his movements aggressive. And it showed something else, Riker pausing outside the diner window, looking in at Marcus and his friends, his expression twisting into something ugly before he even walked through the door. "He targeted you," Agent Rodriguez said quietly. "This wasn't random. This wasn't a response to anything you did. He saw 3 black teenagers laughing, and he decided to remind you of what he thought your place was. Premeditation. Intent. The video proved it. We're releasing this along with Trevor's footage and the smartwatch data," Reeves said. "Full transparency. Let them try to call it a misunderstanding when the world can see him choosing you as a target." At 6:25 p.m., They gathered near the entrance, waiting for Aldridge to finish his statement on the TV mounted in the corner. The chief stood behind a podium, American flag on one side, city flag on the other, his expression grave and concerned. Officer Riker is a 12-year veteran of this department with numerous commendations, Aldridge was saying. He has served this community with distinction and honor. While we take all allegations seriously, we must also be careful not to rush to judgment based on incomplete information or the emotional reactions of those involved. Marcus's mother made a sound that was half laugh, half snarl. Emotional reactions. Because a child being assaulted should respond with calm, measured analysis. Today's incident is being reviewed internally, Aldridge continued, and we are cooperating with all appropriate oversight. However, I want to be clear that this department stands behind our officers when they act in good faith to maintain order and safety in our community. Translation: we're circling the wagons. We're protecting our own. The victim doesn't matter because the badge does. The press conference ended and Reeves nodded. We're up. Remember, stay calm, stick to the facts, and let the evidence speak. They filed into the press room, cameras immediately flashing like lightning. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest, but his father's hand on his shoulder kept him grounded. We're in this together. You're not alone. Agent Holloway stepped to the podium, and the room quieted. Good evening. My name is Special Agent Marcus Holloway, and I serve in the FBI's Civil Rights Division. I'm here tonight wearing two hats, as a federal agent investigating a pattern of civil rights violations in this jurisdiction, and as a father whose son was assaulted by a police officer this afternoon. Cameras clicked like a swarm of mechanical insects. At approximately 3:45 p.m. today, my 17-year-old son Marcus Holloway Jr. was physically assaulted by Officer Dale Riker of a local police department while sitting in a public diner with two friends. This assault occurred without provocation, without justification, and without cause. It was witnessed by 23 people, recorded by multiple devices, and documented by biometric monitoring equipment. He pressed a remote, and the screens behind him lit up with evidence. Trevor's video, the security camera footage showing Riker's targeting behavior, the smartwatch data showing Marcus's heart rate spiking from 72 to 148 in under 30 seconds. What you're seeing is not a misunderstanding. It's not an emotional overreaction. It's a clear pattern of abuse of authority by an officer who has 6 similar complaints against him spanning 4 years, complaints that were all dismissed internally by a department that has consistently chosen to protect its officers over protecting the citizens they serve. The reporters were silent now, watching the evidence play out in real time. Tonight, Chief Aldridge asked us not to rush to judgment. I agree. Let's not rush. Let's look at every case Officer Riker has been involved in. Let's review every complaint, every use of force report, every arrest. Let's let the evidence, not the badge, determine the truth. He stepped back, and Reeves stepped forward to moderate questions. But before she could call on the first reporter, the door at the back of the room opened. Chief Aldridge walked in, his face purple with fury. This is a federal investigation, Reeves said immediately. Chief, you're welcome to observe, but... This is a witch hunt, Aldridge interrupted, his voice booming. You're using your son's situation to attack my entire department, to undermine years of good police work, to hold corrupt officers accountable, Agent Holloway said, his voice cutting through Aldridge's bluster like a blade. If that threatens your department, Chief, perhaps you should ask yourself why. The cameras were eating it up. This wasn't just a press conference anymore. This was the conflict in real time, the collision of institutional protection and federal oversight playing out for the world to see. Would Aldridge back down? Double down? Or say something that would make this investigation even bigger than it already was? Chief Aldridge's face went from purple to crimson, a vein pulsing at his temple like a warning light. You want accountability. He took 2 steps into the press room, his bulk filling the space. Fine. Let's talk accountability. Let's talk about federal agents who use their positions to intimidate local law enforcement. Let's talk about teaching children to see prejudice in every interaction, to weaponize claims of racism against officers who are just trying to do their jobs. Chief Aldridge. Agent Holloway's voice dropped to Arctic temperatures. Are you really going to stand in front of cameras and suggest that my 17-year-old son weaponized a red mark on his face that your officer put there? The room went dead silent. Aldridge's mouth open, closed, open again. He was too angry to think clearly, operating on pure defensive instinct. And that instinct was about to cost him everything. "I'm suggesting," Aldridge said, each word careful but too late, "that in today's climate, young people are primed to interpret firm police action as abuse when it's actually just proper enforcement of..." Proper enforcement. Agent Holloway took a step forward. "Tell me, Chief, what statute gives an officer the right to strike a minor who is sitting peacefully in a booth? What procedure justifies choking a teenager while threatening to make them remember their place?" "I'll wait." Aldridge had walked into a trap, and everyone in the room could see it. Every word he spoke to defend Riker was creating more evidence of institutional rot. Every justification was an admission that this wasn't one bad apple. This was a culture that viewed citizens, especially citizens of color, as subjects to be controlled rather than people to be protected. Melissa Reeves stepped smoothly between them. "Chief, I think this press conference should focus on the evidence and the investigation. If you'd like to schedule a separate media availability." "I don't need a separate availability to defend my officers from federal overreach," Aldridge snapped. But his eyes were already showing doubt. His press secretary, standing by the door, was making frantic, cut-it-off gestures across her throat. Too late. The damage was done, and it was being broadcast live on 4 networks and streaming on a dozen websites. If you've ever wondered why police departments protect bad cops even when the evidence is clear, you're watching the answer in real time. Subscribe if you want to see how this investigation unfolds, because this is bigger than one case now. A reporter in the front row raised her hand. "Chief Aldridge, you mentioned that Officer Riker has commendations. Can you tell us if any of those commendations came from arrests or incidents involving the 6 complaints that Agent Holloway referenced?" Aldridge froze. I'd have to review the files to..." "I can answer that," Agent Chen said, stepping forward with her tablet. 4 of Officer Riker's commendations came from arrests directly connected to complaints that were later filed and dismissed. In 2 cases, the arrested individuals served jail time based primarily on Riker's testimony. Both are now seeking appeals based on the pattern of abuse we've documented. Another reporter jumped in. "Does that mean innocent people might be in prison because of this officer?" "It means," Agent Holloway said carefully, "that every case Riker touched needs to be reviewed with fresh eyes. That's not an indictment of every arrest he made, but it's a recognition that when an officer demonstrates a pattern of rights violations, we have an obligation to ensure no one was convicted unjustly." Marcus watched it all unfold, feeling like he was witnessing something historic. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about systemic change, about accountability, about a moment when the machinery of protection at all costs finally ground to a halt because the evidence was too clear and the scrutiny too bright. But he also saw the cost in real time. The reporters were already typing on phones, crafting headlines. "Police Chief defends officer accused of assault. FBI agent claims pattern of abuse in local department. Possible wrongful convictions under review." Tomorrow, this town would tear itself apart. There would be people defending Riker, defending Aldridge, claiming this was all a political attack. There would be others demanding justice, demanding reform, demanding that every officer in the department be investigated. And in the middle of it all would be Marcus, the kid who just wanted to celebrate his friend's 3-pointer and enjoy his after-school hot chocolate. The press conference lasted another 30 minutes. Questions about the investigation scope, timeline, whether other officers were under scrutiny. Agent Holloway fielded them with professional precision, never revealing more than necessary, but never backing down from the core truth. Dale Riker had abused his authority, and the system that protected him was going to be dismantled piece by piece. When it finally ended, Marcus and his family were ushered out through a back exit, away from the cameras. The Bureau had assigned protective detail, not because they expected violence, but because high-profile cases attracted unpredictable attention. In the parking garage, leaning against their car, Marcus finally let himself feel the full weight of the day. His legs went weak, and his father caught him, holding him steady. "It's okay," Agent Holloway said softly. "It's over. You did everything right." "It doesn't feel over," Marcus whispered. "It feels like it's just starting." "Yeah," his father admitted. "It probably is. But here's the thing, son. Sometimes starting is the hardest part. Sometimes just standing up and saying, 'This is wrong,' is the thing that changes everything. His mother wrapped her arms around both of them, and for a moment they just stood there, a family holding each other together in the fluorescent light of a parking garage while the world outside began to shift. Later that night, in the safety of their home, Marcus scrolled through social media. The videos had spread everywhere, millions of views, thousands of comments. Some were supportive, some were vile. Some people saw a clear case of abuse. Others saw a disrespectful teen getting what he deserved. The polarization was instant and complete. But there was one comment that stuck with Marcus, posted by someone with the username @JusticeWatcher217. I was arrested by Riker 3 years ago. I was 17. He said I fit a description. He put his knee on my neck in front of my mother's house. I spent 6 months in juvie before the charges were dropped. I thought I was alone. Thank you for showing me I wasn't. Marcus screenshotted it and sent it to his father. 5 minutes later, Agent Rodriguez called. We need to talk to this person. Can you send us the username? Already done, Marcus replied. One case was becoming 10. 10 would become 50. And somewhere in those 50 stories would be the evidence needed to dismantle a corrupt system and build something better. But would that be enough to change hearts? To change the culture that created officers like Riker in the first place? Or would this just be another moment of outrage that faded when the next news cycle arrived? 3 weeks later, Marcus walked back into Nora's diner for the first time since the incident. He'd avoided it, not out of fear, but out of something more complicated, a tangle of emotions he couldn't quite name. But today was his birthday, and Trevor and Jamal had insisted on their ritual: hot chocolate, terrible jokes, and Nora's famous apple pie. The bell chimed as they entered, and the diner went quiet for exactly 3 seconds before conversation resumed. But it was different now. People looked at him, not with pity or fear, but with something closer to respect. Marcus. Nora came around the counter, pulling him into a hug that smelled like cinnamon and coffee. Happy birthday, sweetheart. Your usual booth is waiting. They slid into the same booth where everything had changed. Someone had cleaned the window, polished it until it gleamed. Marcus touched the glass briefly, remembering the impact, then pulled his hand back. You okay? Jamal asked quietly. Yeah, Marcus said. And he meant it. Yeah, I am. The last 3 weeks had been a tornado. Agent Holloway's investigation had expanded dramatically. 17 former arrestees had come forward with complaints about Riker. 5 cases were being formally reviewed for possible wrongful conviction. And the Department of Justice had announced a full pattern or practice investigation into the entire police department, not just Riker, but the systemic issues that had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked for 12 years. Chief Aldridge had resigned under pressure. Sergeant Mercer had been placed on administrative leave, pending review. And Officer Dale Riker had been charged with 4 counts of civil rights violations, 3 counts of assault, and 1 count of witness intimidation for trying to contact Trevor's family and clarify what had really happened. The trial was still months away, but the avalanche had started, and nothing could stop it now. What happened to Marcus happens every day in America. We just don't always have the evidence, the witness, or the federal agent to make it matter. If you believe these stories need to be told, share your story in the comments. Real change starts with real voices. A man approached their booth, middle-aged, black, wearing a mechanic's uniform with the name, Curtis, stitched over the pocket. Excuse me, you're Marcus Holloway, right? Marcus nodded cautiously. I just wanted to say thank you. Curtis's voice was thick with emotion. Riker arrested my nephew 2 years ago. Kid spent 8 months in detention for a crime he didn't commit. We tried to fight it, tried to get people to listen, but he shook his head. Nobody listened. Until you. I didn't do anything special, Marcus said. You survived, Curtis interrupted. You survived, and your father made sure everyone saw what happened. That's not nothing, son. That's everything. He shook Marcus's hand, a firm, meaningful grip, and walked back to his table where a teenage boy sat watching with eyes that held both pain and hope. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. He hadn't asked to be a symbol, hadn't wanted to be the face of a movement. But maybe that's how change happened, not through people seeking spotlights, but through ordinary people in ordinary moments who refused to accept that injustice was just the way things are. His phone buzzed. A text from his father. Proud of you. Always. Marcus smiled and pocketed the phone just as Nora brought over 3 massive slices of apple pie, each with a candle stuck in the center. "Make a wish," she said. Marcus looked at his friends at the diner full of people who'd witnessed his worst moment and were now part of his best outcome. He looked at the window where his face had struck glass, now polished clean. He thought about Curtis's nephew, about a Justice Watcher 217, about all the people whose stories were finally being heard. He closed his eyes and wished not for himself, but for a future where what happened to him became impossible, where badges meant protection instead of threat, where his father's intervention wouldn't be necessary because the system itself was just. He blew out the candles, and his friends cheered. Outside, life in the town continued. Some people were angry about the investigation, claiming it was an attack on law enforcement. Others were relieved that accountability was finally arriving. The local paper ran editorials on both sides. Social media exploded with arguments. But in Nora's diner, at a worn leather booth with hot chocolate and birthday pie, 3 teenage boys laughed about basketball and girls and college applications. Normal life, hard-won and precious. The door chimed, and Marcus's whole body tensed instinctively. But it wasn't a cop, just a family with 2 small children looking for a place to eat. "You okay?" Trevor asked again. "Getting there," Marcus admitted. "It's gonna take time." "Time we've got," Jamal said, raising his mug of hot chocolate in a toast. To Marcus, the kid who stood up by staying still. They clinked mugs, and the sound was perfect. Later, as they were leaving, Marcus paused at the door and looked back at the booth. A new family was sliding into it now, completely unaware of its history. Just another seat in a diner, worn from years of customers and conversations. Maybe that was the point. Maybe justice wasn't about monuments or eternal recognition. Maybe it was about making sure that booth was safe for the next kid who sat there. Making sure they could laugh with their friends without fear. Making sure the next officer who walked through that door saw citizens instead of subjects. People instead of problems. Marcus stepped out into the autumn afternoon, the sun warm on his face. Somewhere across town, his father was in a conference room with a dozen agents, building the case that would reshape an entire department. Somewhere in a holding facility, Dale Riker was probably realizing that his 12 years of unchecked authority had finally run out. And here on Main Street, a 17-year-old boy who'd been slapped and choked and threatened was walking home with his friends, eating apple pie, and planning what college applications to finish this weekend. Normal life. The most radical act of resistance there is. Would this case be remembered in 5 years? 10? Or would it fade like so many others, another headline in an endless stream? And did that even matter if it changed just one person's life? 6 months after the incident, Marcus sat in a federal courtroom wearing the suit his father had helped him pick out, charcoal gray, professional, grown up in a way that made him feel both powerful and uncomfortable. The trial of Dale Riker had become a media sensation. Not because it was unique. Abuse of authority cases happen regularly, but because the evidence was so overwhelming and the defendant's fall from grace so complete. Camera crews lined the courthouse steps. Legal analysts dissected every motion and filing. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, 17 people who'd been victimized by Riker over the years sat together, a unified testimony to systemic failure. Marcus was scheduled to testify today. His stomach churned with nerves despite the preparation. He'd gone over his statement with prosecutors a dozen times. "Just tell the truth," they'd said. "The evidence speaks for itself. You just need to provide the human context." Human context. As if being assaulted was just a data point that needed emotional color. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Patricia Morrison entered, a black woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for tolerating zero nonsense from anyone. Her appointment to federal bench had been contentious, opposed by the same law and order politicians who were now conspicuously silent about Riker's trial. "The United States versus Dale Anthony Riker," she announced. "We'll proceed with the prosecution's witness. Mr. Holloway, please take the stand." Marcus stood on shaking legs, walked to the witness box, and placed his hand on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." He sat, and for the first time looked directly at Dale Riker. The man had aged a decade in 6 months. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. He'd lost weight, lost his swagger, lost everything that had made him feel invincible. Now he was just a middle-aged man in an ill-fitting suit, facing the consequences of 12 years of cruelty. Marcus felt something unexpected, not satisfaction, but sadness. What had broken inside Riker to make him hurt people? What chain of choices and circumstances had led him to that diner, to that moment, to that decision to slap a teenager for the crime of laughing? The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Janet Cormier, approached with a gentle smile. "Marcus, can you tell us in your own words what happened on the afternoon of October 15th? And so he did. The whole story from the beginning. The basketball game. The laughter with his friends. Riker's entrance. The immediate aggression. The slap that echoed through the diner. The hand on his throat. The threats. The humiliation." His voice stayed steady through most of it, but cracked when he described the look in Riker's eyes, the absolute certainty that he could do whatever he wanted because the badge made him untouchable. If you've made it this far in this story, I want you to really think about something. How many moments like this happen when there's no FBI agent father? No cameras, no evidence. Subscribe because these are the stories that need to be told, whether they have happy endings or not. What were you feeling during this encounter? Cormier asked. "Scared," Marcus said quietly. "Confused. I kept trying to figure out what I'd done wrong, because I thought if I understood that, I could fix it. Could apologize. Could make him stop." He looked at the jury. "It took me a long time to realize I hadn't done anything wrong, that it was never about my behavior. It was about his power." The cross-examination was brutal. Riker's defense attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Denise Packard, tried every angle to discredit Marcus. Had he been drinking? No. Had he used profanity in the diner? No. Had he made any gestures that could be interpreted as aggressive? No. Had he been taught by his father to view police with suspicion? "Objection," Cormier said. "Relevance." "I'll rephrase," Packard said smoothly. "Marcus, did your father ever discuss his work investigating police misconduct?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "And did those discussions influence how you interpreted Officer Riker's actions?" Marcus thought carefully. "My father taught me the difference between good police officers and bad ones. He taught me that the badge is supposed to represent protection and service. So yeah, when Officer Riker hit me and threatened me, I knew that wasn't what good policing looks like, if that's what you're asking." It was a perfect answer, honest, thoughtful, impossible to spin. Even Packard seemed to recognize she'd walked into it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 17 witnesses testified about their encounters with Riker. The smartwatch data was presented, the videos played frame by frame. Expert witnesses explained the pattern of abuse, the statistical impossibility that all these incidents were coincidental or justified. And then finally Dale Riker took the stand in his own defense. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out from the inside. His testimony was mechanical, defensive. Yes, he'd put his hands on Marcus. Yes, he'd been angry. But he maintained he'd been responding to what he perceived as a threat, the way Marcus had looked at him, the tension in the diner, the high-crime area that required firm action. "Mr. Riker," Judge Morrison interrupted at one point. "Are you testifying that this diner on Main Street, frequented primarily by high school students and seniors, constitutes a high-crime area?" Riker's lawyer whispered urgently to him, but the damage was done. Even his own justifications couldn't hold up under scrutiny. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, Marcus was back in the courtroom with his parents, Trevor, Jamal, and Nora. The 17 other victims filled 2 rows. Agent Chun and Agent Rodriguez sat in the back, their faces professionally neutral. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This moment, this single moment, would determine whether 6 months of investigation, testimony, media scrutiny, and emotional exhaustion had been worth it. On the count of civil rights violations under color of law, how do you find? Guilty. On the count of assault in the 2nd degree. Guilty. On the count of witness intimidation. Guilty. 4 counts. For guilty verdicts. Dale Riker closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of those words had physically broken him. The courtroom erupted in quiet tears and held hands. No cheering. This wasn't victory so much as accountability. No celebration. Too many people had been hurt for this to feel like winning. Judge Morrison set sentencing for 6 weeks later, then addressed Riker directly. Mr. Riker, you took an oath to serve and protect. You were given extraordinary power and public trust, and you weaponized both against the very people you swore to serve. This verdict is not a condemnation of law enforcement, it's a defense of it. Because when officers like you abuse that power, you endanger every good officer who does their job with integrity and honor. She dismissed the court, and suddenly Marcus was surrounded by people, his parents, his friends, prosecutors, victims. Everyone talking at once, thanking him, crying, processing. But Marcus found himself looking back at Riker, who sat alone at the defense table while his attorney packed up files. Just a man now. Not an officer. Not a threat. Just someone who'd made terrible choices and would spend the next years paying for them. Outside the courthouse, the media waited. But Agent Holloway stepped to the microphones alone. Justice was served today, he said simply. Not because my son was the victim, but because 17 people had the courage to come forward. Because good officers in that department chose truth over loyalty. Because a jury looked at the evidence and made the right call. He paused. This case should never have been necessary. But since it was, I'm grateful it can serve as a reminder that no one is above accountability. Marcus watched his father speak and felt something settle in his chest. Not closure. Trauma doesn't really have closure. But resolution. A sense that the worst day of his life had been transformed into something that mattered beyond himself. That night back home, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from at Justice Watcher 217. My conviction was overturned today. I'm free. Thank you for giving me my life back. Marcus showed his father, who read it and pulled him into a long hug. That, Agent Holloway said quietly, is why we do this. Not for the headlines. Not for the verdicts. For that message right there. 3 months later, Dale Riker was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The police department underwent a complete reform, overseen by federal monitors. Chief Aldridge was never charged, but his political career was over. 8 wrongful convictions were overturned. Dozens of cases were reviewed. And Marcus Holloway went back to being a kid who loved basketball and hot chocolate and hanging out with his friends. Except he wasn't just that kid anymore. He was also the kid who'd shown that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's staying still when every instinct screams to run. Sometimes it's trusting that truth will eventually catch up to power. Sometimes it's just a 17-year-old boy in a diner booth, refusing to let the worst moment define him. Years later, when Marcus would tell this story, and he would tell it many times to many audiences, people would always ask the same question. Do you think what happened to you changed anything? Really changed anything? And Marcus would answer honestly, I don't know if it changed the world, but it changed 17 lives. It changed a department. It changed a town. And maybe that's enough. Maybe change doesn't have to be universal to matter. Maybe it just has to be real. Real change. One case at a time. One voice at a time. One person refusing to accept that injustice is just the cost of doing business. That's the story of how a slap in a diner became a reckoning. How one bad day became the catalyst for accountability. How a kid eating pie with his friends accidentally became part of something bigger than himself. It's not a happy ending because there are too many stories still untold and too many people still suffering. But it's a hopeful one. And sometimes in the fight for justice, hope is enough to keep going. What would you do with that hope? Would you use your voice? Would you stand with the next Marcus who needs witnesses? The answer to that question is the answer to whether stories like this are worth telling. I think they are. I hope you do too.